Harry and Meghan Markle split from the royal family. They'll formally step down as senior royals March 31st.
The Sandringham Agreement is still sitting on the official royal website right now. Go look it up yourself. It's been there since January 2020, and it says, in plain language, that the Sussexes will not use their HRH titles, not publicly, not commercially, not in any context. That was the deal. Both parties signed it. The late Queen approved it. 5 years later, those two words, Your Royal Highness, showed up on Meghan's Instagram in a gift basket sent to a podcast host, and on camera on Netflix, in Meghan's own voice. That's not a tabloid rumor. Those are 3 documented incidents on major platforms under a signed agreement. A source close to Prince William has confirmed to the Daily Beast on the record what happens next when he becomes king. Tonight, we're going through all of it. Not the gossip version, the legal and financial version. The Sandringham Agreement and what it actually says. 3 violations, each one bigger than the last. The collapse of $120 million in industry deals, 18 staff departures, an origin story that Vanity Fair couldn't verify and that her own father called embellished, and the specific legal mechanism letters patent that will eventually settle the entire question of what the Sussex brand is actually built on and what happens to it when that foundation is pulled out from under them. Let's start with the agreement, because nothing else in this story makes sense without it. January 2020, Meghan and Harry sit down with the late Queen Elizabeth at Sandringham and negotiate the terms of their exit from royal duties. The agreement is documented, signed, and published on the official royal website, where it still sits today. The terms are specific: no HRH titles, not publicly, not commercially, not in any context. In return,
when they brought in Meghan Markle and her husband, what did they do? Like a $20 million deal? And so now
they keep the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles and walk away with their dignity intact. That was the deal. Written down, signed by both parties. Fast forward to April 2025, Meghan opens Instagram and posts a letter from Ukraine's vice president unedited. No caption clarifying that the diplomatic address was a courtesy. No note that the title used by the sender wasn't correct. Just the full letter with the words, Your Royal Highness, sitting right at the top, visible to millions of followers on a commercial platform. A source close to Prince William did not hold back when speaking to the Daily Beast. You'd have to be an idiot to believe she didn't know exactly what she was doing when she posted that message unedited to her stories. Another source was just as direct. Every time you think they can't make it worse, they make it worse. The deal on the HRH was a way to let them walk away with pride, and now she's using it to sell jam. But the Instagram post wasn't a one-off. Around the same time, podcast host Jaime King received a personal gift basket from Meghan, addressed using the HRH title, not a foreign diplomat following protocol, a personal gift, sent commercially, bearing a title she had agreed in writing never to use in any context. Then there's the Netflix footage, and this one matters more than the rest. It's not a letter, it's not a basket, it can't be dismissed as someone else's wording. This is Meghan, on camera, on a commercial streaming platform watched by tens of millions, in her own voice. When Mindy Kaling referred to her as Meghan Markle during filming, Meghan stopped her. It's so funny that you keep saying Meghan Markle. You know I'm Sussex now. A woman who signed a formal agreement not to commercially use her royal identity, correcting a celebrity into using it.
A commercial to people all over America. And, it's funny to look back at it now.
On Netflix, on permanent record. It cannot be walked back. The Sandringham Agreement is on the official royal website. The Instagram post is documented. The gift basket is documented. The Netflix correction is on camera. Royal expert Kinsey Schofield stated it plainly. Harry and Meghan aren't supposed to use their titles for profit, but they obviously do. Privacy expert Trevor Cook went further, suggesting the royal family could pursue legal action over the commercial use of a title she had agreed not to use commercially. Lawyers have a specific term for what that creates: material misrepresentation. The foundational claim upon which a commercial arrangement was made turns out to be legally problematic, and we will come back to exactly what that means. But first, the industry has already delivered its own verdict, and the numbers are striking. In 2020, Netflix signed a reported $100 million deal with Harry and Meghan. The pitch was simple: royal access, royal storytelling. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex bringing the monarchy to a global streaming audience. For a while, the numbers justified it. Then March 2026 arrived, and Netflix officially terminated its partnership with Archwell Productions. No dramatic announcement, no public falling out, just a clean ending. Industry insiders described the mood inside Netflix in 4 words: we're done with them. Before that, Spotify, a multi-million-dollar podcast deal that should have produced years of content. What it actually produced was 1 season. When the contract ended, Spotify executive Bill Simmons did not send a polite farewell. He went on record and called them frauds. Not a disappointment, not a creative mismatch. Frauds.
She wasn't necessarily popular when life was difficult.
That word came from inside the building. Then in April 2026, Penguin Random House, the same publisher that turned Harry's memoir into a global bestseller and had every commercial reason to stay, let a reported $20 million book deal quietly expire without renewal. Sources described both sides as having burned the bridge, with the publisher specifically feeling financially burned by what had been delivered against what had been promised. That word, burned, not disappointed, not creatively misaligned matters beyond just one contract. Publishers do not enter 9-figure relationships lightly. They conduct due diligence, they assess the author's platform, track record, and commercial trajectory. Penguin Random House made those assessments in 2020 and arrived at a specific number. By 2026, they had arrived at a completely different conclusion. Added up $100 million from Netflix, gone. A multi-million Spotify contract, gone. A $20 million book deal, gone. 3 of the biggest names in their respective industries arriving at the same conclusion within months of each other. That is not a rough patch. That is not bad timing. That is a verdict. And every single one of those deals was built on the same foundation: the Sussex name, the royal identity, the Duchess brand. That was the selling point. That was what made the numbers make sense. Strip that title permanently, officially, and legally, and the commercial logic that justified every one of those contracts doesn't just weaken, the flaw disappears entirely. What remains is a lifestyle brand selling jam at price points that only made sense when the person behind the label was the Duchess of Sussex. Now, let's talk about the foundation those deals were.
I really liked her. I just think she's a slight social climber, I'm afraid. And when I see the way, I mean, look, at her wedding, there was only one member
Actually built on. Because before the contracts, before the streaming deals, there was a story Meghan had been telling for 20 years. She was 11 years old. She saw a Procter & Gamble commercial that said women across America were fighting greasy pots and pans. She was outraged. So she sat down and wrote letters to Hillary Clinton, to P&G, to senators. And according to Meghan, it worked. P&G changed the commercial. Clinton personally wrote back. And 1 year, old girl, changed corporate America. She told this story at the United Nations. She told it at the One Young World Summit. She told it in her Vanity Fair profile. She told it again in Colombia in 2024. For 2 decades, it was the cornerstone of her public identity. The girl who saw injustice, picked up a pen, and won. There is one problem. Vanity Fair's own fact-checkers went looking for the evidence. They went directly to P&G. They consulted advertising historians. What they found, or more precisely, what they could not find, was enough for them to pull the story from the article entirely. They could not verify it. They found no evidence whatsoever that she ever received a personal reply from Hillary Clinton. No letter, no record, no confirmation from anyone at Clinton's office. Then her own father weighed in. In his 2020 documentary, Thomas Markle said on camera, "I think Meghan was part of a letter-writing campaign of sorts." The story about her single-handedly changing the ad may have been a little embellished. A letter-writing campaign in school, as a class assignment, not a lone activist, not a girl who changed corporate America, a student doing homework, Meghan's own PR team subsequently hired journalists who chose not to include the
It actually opens the door also to when William becomes king, quite reasonably stripping Harry of his title.
P&G story in the official media bulletins sent to press. Not because it had aged out of relevance, but because it had become a liability to circulate. That is a specific and significant choice. It means the people paid to protect her reputation had concluded that a story she had been telling publicly for 20 years was no longer safe to put in official materials. The origin story she used to earn a UN ambassadorship, the cornerstone of the entire Meghan Markle brand. Her own father called it embellished. Vanity Fair could not confirm it. Not a single person at P&G, at Clinton's office, or in advertising history could verify the letter ever existed. If the very first story she ever told about herself publicly cannot survive a basic fact check, that raises a deeply uncomfortable question about everything built on top of it. Now, let's talk about the staff, because those numbers tell a story that no PR strategy can rewrite. Meghan told Oprah she felt unsupported inside the institution. She positioned herself as someone the system failed to protect. It's a compelling narrative. But it raises one question it never quite answers. If Meghan was the one being mistreated, why did 18 people walk out of her operation between 2020 and 2026? 18 documented departures, 3 per year on average. Not anonymous sources or tabloid speculation, people with names, with careers, with professional reputations they had every reason to protect. They left anyway. Samantha Cohen spent 17 years working for the British royal family and was one of the most experienced palace aides the institution had. She became Meghan's private secretary in 2018. The plan was to stay 6 months, help Meghan find her footing, and hand off to a permanent replacement.
Newspaper journalist said that William despises his brother now, so that relationship is over.
She stayed 18 months, not because she wanted to extend, but because they could not find anyone willing to take the job permanently. When a replacement was finally identified, the palace flew that person to Africa, specifically to shadow Cohen on a royal tour. The replacement quit while still in Africa, before the tour was even finished. Cohen herself confirmed this in 2024, speaking to the Herald Sunday. She was also one of 10 staff members formally interviewed by Buckingham Palace as part of an independent investigation into conduct inside the Sussex household, a review privately funded by Queen Elizabeth herself. The findings were never made public. The changes that followed were implemented quietly, without announcement. But the fact that a sitting monarch chose to personally fund an independent investigation into her own grandson's household is not a small thing. That kind of action only happens when the people with the most information have concluded the problem is real enough to demand an official response. 18 documented departures across 6 years. Senior professionals who had worked at the highest levels of public life, who understood discretion, pressure, and the particular demands of royal service. They left anyway. And the way they spoke when they did carefully, after long delays, in the measured language of people who understood the gravity of going on record, that is not the pattern of people who left casually. Then there is the personal pattern. Because the same thing that happened inside Meghan's professional operation has been documented by people who were once among her closest friends. There is now an entry in the Urban Dictionary for what happens to people who get close to Meghan Markle. The word is markled. It means to be completely abandoned by someone after playing a meaningful role in their life. The fact that a dictionary entry exists because the pattern is that recognizable, that consistent, that widely documented, that tells you more than any single story could. Monarchy, Priti and Meghan met at age 2. They grew up inseparable sleepovers, road trips, a European holiday together, the kind of friendship that doesn't need to be maintained because it simply exists underneath everything else. Priti was Meghan's maid of honor at her first wedding to Trevor Engelson in 2011. She was there through the entire marriage. She was there through the divorce. 30 years of shared history. And she was not invited to the royal wedding in 2018. No confrontation, no falling out, no final phone call where at least you'd know what went wrong. Just silence. The particular kind of silence that is harder to process than a direct ending because it doesn't give you anything to respond to. It simply removes you, cleanly and completely, without the courtesy of an explanation. When you look at that relationship across 30 years, the shared childhood, the maid of honor at the first wedding, the complete absence from the second, what you're looking at is not a relationship that ended. It is a relationship that was ended by one person, without warning, without stated reason, and without the basic acknowledgement that 30 years deserved, at minimum, a conversation. When Priti eventually spoke to the press, years later, she used the careful language of someone who had thought about it for a long time. I think Meghan was calculated, very calculated, in the way she handled people and relationships. She is very strategic in the way she cultivates circles of friends. Once she decides you're not part of her life, she can be very cold. Jessica Mulroney styled Meghan for years, helped her navigate the media storm of the early Harry era, was at the royal wedding, was at the baby shower, went on royal tours. Multiple sources described her as Meghan's most trusted confidant. Then, in June 2020, Mulroney got into a public dispute with a black influencer, and Meghan cut contact immediately. A source told Page Six that the controversy gave Meghan the excuse she was apparently waiting for to cut Mulroney off for good. 9 years ended the moment it became a liability. Then there's Piers Morgan. In 2016, Meghan followed him on social media. They exchanged messages. They met for a drink in London. That same evening, she met Harry at a party. Morgan described what happened next with blunt simplicity. That was the last I ever heard from Meghan Markle. These are not people who betrayed her first and spoke second. They were left first, quietly, without explanation, without the conversation that 3 decades of friendship or 9 years of close professional confidence surely warranted. And when they finally spoke, they used the language of people who were genuinely hurt and had taken a long time to understand what had happened to them. Not people selling a story. People who had been trying to make sense of something that didn't add up and had eventually arrived at a conclusion they weren't even looking for. Now, let's bring this back to where it all leads, because the personal pattern and the professional pattern point to the same place, and that place has a legal name. The Sussex brand was never really about Meghan. It was about 2 words in front of her name, Duchess of Sussex. That is what opened the doors. That is what made Netflix write a 9-figure check. That is what put her on the stage at the United Nations. Not her television resume, not her activism work, not the origin story about a letter to P&G and a personal reply from Hillary Clinton that her own PR team eventually stopped including in press materials. The title, the 2 words she agreed in writing not to use commercially, and then systematically used as the commercial foundation for every major deal she entered into, was always borrowed, always conditional. And the condition was always that it could be removed. Harry was born a prince. He is the son of a king, the grandson of a queen. Whatever happens to his titles, he is constitutionally and historically part of the House of Windsor. He has a flaw. Meghan Rachel Markle is from Los Angeles. Her father was a lighting director. The title Duchess of Sussex was a courtesy title given through marriage by royal prerogative because she happened to marry the right man at the right time. It was never hers by birth. It was never hers by right. It was given. And what is given by royal prerogative can be removed the exact same way. A source close to Prince William confirmed to the Daily Beast exactly what happens when he becomes king. There is no way King William will stand for this. The titles will simply be removed when he is king. A way will be found. Not a threat. Not palace gossip. A confirmed position, stated on the record, by a named source. When the letters patent is issued and those titles are removed officially and permanently, every business arrangement Meghan has entered into since 2020 faces a retroactive question. What exactly did every business partner, every retailer, every investor actually sign up for? Were they entering agreements with Meghan Markle, the former actress, or with the Duchess of Sussex, an identity that, by signed agreement, was never supposed to be available for commercial use, and which will at some point no longer exist legally? That question has no comfortable answer, and unlike a bad headline, it does not fade with the next news cycle. It compounds, it accumulates. It moves from corporate boardrooms toward the kind of conversation that eventually finds its way into legal filings, and once it gets there, nobody walks away clean. Material misrepresentation does not require a dramatic courtroom moment to trigger it. It does not need a smoking gun or a whistleblower. It simply requires that the foundational claim upon which a commercial arrangement was made turns out to be legally invalid, and then someone with standing decides to ask the question in a formal setting. That is it. That is the entire mechanism. And right now, there are multiple parties with standing, with resources, and with very good reasons to start asking. Consider what that actually means in practice. Every retailer that stocked as ever products did so because of the brand story attached to those products. Every media outlet that covered the launch did so because of who was behind the label. Every consumer who paid premium prices for jam and tea did so because the name on the packaging carried weight that came entirely from a royal identity she had agreed in writing not to commercialize. The moment that identity is officially and legally removed, every one of those transactions sits on a foundation that no longer exists. Tom Bower has written 2 books on this subject, Revenge in 2022 and Betrayal in 2026. 80 sources across both books, lawyers involved at every stage, and across both publications, with Meghan's famously aggressive legal team working against him the entire time. Bower has not faced a single successful legal challenge to either book, not one. For someone whose representatives have a well-documented track record of pursuing publications that print things she contests, that silence around Bower's specific reporting is not just notable, it is telling. It suggests the documents and sources he is working from are solid enough that a formal challenge would be more dangerous for the challenger than for the author. The people who signed those documents know exactly where they are. So does Bower. And so, increasingly, does everyone else paying attention. Now let's talk about what removal actually looks like in practice, because this is where most coverage stops short. People hear titles removed and picture a formal announcement, maybe a statement from Buckingham Palace, a press release, a news cycle. That is not how letters patent works. Letters patent is a legal instrument. It operates through the machinery of constitutional law, not through press offices or media strategy. When William becomes king, he will have the full legal authority to issue or revoke letters patent as he sees fit. No vote required, no public consultation, no appeal process available to the affected parties. A source close to Prince William confirmed to the Daily Beast, "There is no way King William will stand for this. The titles will simply be removed when he is king. A way will be found." Read that again carefully. Not an emotional reaction, not a palace insider venting frustration. A confirmed position, stated on the record, describing a legal process that is already understood internally to be inevitable. The word "simply" is doing a lot of work in that sentence. It signals that the mechanism is already identified, already understood, and already considered straightforward by the people who will execute it. Strip that title permanently, officially, and legally, and the commercial logic that justified every single contract collapses with it. The Netflix deal was not signed with a former actress from Los Angeles. It was signed with the Duchess of Sussex. The Spotify arrangement was not built around a lifestyle influencer. It was built around a woman with a royal identity and the access and credibility that came with it. Penguin Random House did not offer a reported $20 million for a memoir by someone whose primary credential was a mid-tier television role. They offered it for the insider royal perspective of someone who had lived inside the House of Windsor and was prepared to write about it from the inside. Every single one of those commercial decisions traces back to the same 2 words. And every single one of those commercial relationships has now ended. Netflix terminated in March 2026, Spotify calling them frauds publicly, Penguin Random House letting the book deal expire without renewal, and sources describing the publisher as feeling financially burned. 3 of the most powerful names in their respective industries arriving at the same conclusion within months of each other. That is not coincidence. That is a market delivering a verdict. Now consider the staff record alongside the commercial record, because together they form a pattern that is impossible to explain away. 18 documented departures between 2020 and 2026, 3 per year on average. These were not entry-level positions filled by people who did not understand what they were signing up for. These were senior professionals, people with decades of experience at the highest levels of public service, people who understood pressure, discretion, and the particular demands of operating inside a high-profile household. They left anyway. Samantha Cohen, 17 years of royal service, one of the most experienced palace aides the institution, had become Meghan's private secretary in 2018 and stayed 18 months, not because she chose to extend, but because a replacement could not be found. When one was finally identified, that person was flown to Africa to shadow Cohen on a royal tour and quit before the tour was even finished. The replacement quit in Africa. That single data point alone should stop anyone in their tracks. This was not someone who left after a difficult first week in a new office. This was a professional who had already committed, traveled internationally, begun the handover process, and still chose to walk away before completing it. Queen Elizabeth herself privately funded an independent investigation into conduct inside the Sussex household. The findings were never released publicly. The changes that followed were implemented without announcement. But the very fact that a sitting monarch chose to fund that investigation at personal cost, with personal involvement, tells you everything about the conclusions that had already been reached privately by the people with the most complete picture of what was actually happening inside that household. And then there is the biography, because the commercial record and the staff record both sit on top of a personal story that has been eroding for years. The P&G origin story, the letter that launched a career. The tale of an 1-year-old who saw injustice, picked up a pen, and changed corporate America. Told at the United Nations. Told at the One Young World Summit. Told in the Vanity Fair profile. Told again in Columbia in 2024. For 2 decades, it was the opening chapter of everything, the foundation upon which the entire humanitarian identity was constructed. Vanity Fair's fact-checkers went looking for the evidence and could not find it. No letter, no record. No confirmation from P&G, from Clinton's office, or from anyone in advertising history. The story was pulled from the article entirely, not because it was outdated, but because it could not be verified. Her own father then went on camera and described it as a letter-writing campaign, a class assignment, something that may have been a little embellished. Her own PR team subsequently stopped including it in official press materials, a specific and deliberate choice that signals the people paid to protect her. Reputation had concluded the story had become a liability. If the very first story she ever told about herself publicly, the cornerstone of the UN ambassadorship, the humanitarian platform, the entire Meghan Markle identity cannot survive a fact check, then every layer built on top of it becomes structurally questionable. That is not a smear. That is basic logic. A building is only as solid as what it sits on. The personal pattern runs parallel to everything else. Monarchy Priddy, a friend since age 2, maid of honor at the first wedding, 30 years of shared history, was not invited to the royal wedding in 2018. No explanation, no conversation, no acknowledgement that 3 decades deserved at minimum a direct word, just removal. Jessica Mulroney, 9 years of close friendship, royal tours, baby showers, described by multiple sources as Meghan's most trusted confidant, cut off the moment a public controversy made the association inconvenient. A source told Page 6 the dispute gave Meghan the excuse she was apparently waiting for. Piers Morgan, 1 drink in London in 2016, messages exchanged, and then complete silence from the moment Harry entered the picture. That was the last I ever heard from Meghan Markle, Morgan said. The Urban Dictionary now has an entry for it. The word is markled. It exists because the pattern is that consistent, that recognizable, that widely documented across enough different people and enough different contexts that it warranted its own definition. That is not tabloid invention. That is cultural documentation of a behavioral pattern that enough people have independently experienced and independently described in similar enough terms that it became its own word. What makes the personal pattern significant in this context is not the gossip value. It is what it reveals about the decision-making framework. People are assessed for their utility. Relationships are maintained while they serve a purpose and ended cleanly when they stop. That framework, applied to personal friendships, produces the pattern that Priddy, Mulroney, and Morgan all described. Applied to commercial partnerships, it produces the pattern that Netflix, Spotify, and Penguin Random House all experienced. The same logic, operating at different scales, producing the same outcome every time. Priddy described it plainly. Once she decides you're not part of her life, she can be very cold, clean, total, final. Nobody anticipated that an institution centuries older than any of the individuals in this story would eventually respond in exactly the same register. Cold, clean, total, final. No negotiation, no appeal, no reframe available. The palace does not do press releases about this kind of thing. It does not hold press conferences or offer comment to tabloids. It simply acts through the legal instruments available to it, on a timeline of its own choosing, without requiring anyone's cooperation or consent. As ever can rebrand, the Jam can get a new label, the Instagram grid can be refreshed, the podcast can pivot, the memoir can be repositioned. None of that touches the paper trail. The Sandringham Agreement is on the official royal website and has been since January 2020. The Instagram post is documented. The gift basket is documented. The Netflix footage is on camera, in Meghan's own voice, on permanent record. The 10 witnesses from the internal investigation are not going anywhere. The 18 staff departures are a matter of public record. Tom Bower's 80 sources across 2 legally unchallenged books are not disappearing. And the letter's patent mechanism does not require a majority vote or a media campaign to execute. The clock is running on the Sussex brand in a way that no strategy session or brand consultant can address, because the problem is not the branding. The problem is the foundation. The title will come off. The agreement is published. The violations are documented. The legal framework is not a theory. It is a constitutional process that begins the moment William takes the throne, and it does not require a single person's cooperation to complete. What nobody has fully reckoned with yet is what comes after. Not the headlines, not the reaction pieces, not the social media cycle. What comes after in the boardrooms, in the legal departments, in the quiet conversations between investors and their advisors about what exactly they were sold and whether the representation that sold it was ever legally valid. That conversation has not happened publicly yet, but it is coming, and when it does, it will not be about gossip or palace drama. It will be about contracts, representations, and what the law says about what was built on a foundation that was always conditional, always borrowed, and always one royal decree away from being removed entirely. Now, we want to hear from you. Which part of this story do you think carries the most legal weight? The title violations, the collapsed deals, the staff record, or the letter's patent question? Drop your full analysis in the comments. This community consistently brings the sharpest, most informed takes, and this topic deserves exactly that level of conversation. If this deep dive gave you something real to think about, hit that like button. It makes a genuine difference in getting this content to more people. Share this with someone who needs the full picture, not just the headlines. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because we go deeper than anywhere else every single time. See you on the next one.